very, very pleased to be here and to have a conversation with you people, because you are of an age that I assume that you know a great deal about the Shoah. You don't need anybody to tell you what happened. However, I am some kind of a resource person, yeah? I'm so happy she is here, because what is not in that story is that we found, after the liberation, Paul's best friend that happened to be her grandfather. Our families had been linked since then, since 1945. They had known each other as children. They went to Cheder together. And when they found each other, the decision was, we lost your family, we lost our family, we'll be together. We escaped from Hungary together, and the four of us, these are Naomi's grandparents, Steve, Lucia, and Paul and I, we went to medical school together. We came to this country together. We were never really separated. And now, how many generations, Naomi? Fourth generation. We have our seders together. We keep in touch. They have become cousins, family. You know how Jews feel about mishpacha. If you lose one, you create one. And this is our new mishpacha. Now, as I said, I'm not going to tell you about the Shoah because I assume this is well known to you. You've been to religious school, you took classes, and some of you maybe even have somebody in your family who is a survivor. Could you show me some hands as to how many you have? Oh, quite a few of you. You know, now when I go to the younger generation, as I go to schools very frequently, and these are the fourth generation, because they are fifth, sixth graders, seventh graders. The last time I went to one of these schools, there was one child who ever seen a survivor. So it's now a very, very old story. But you already heard from your rabbi where I come from, and the Hungarian Jewish situation was really quite different from all the others. In many ways, you would say we were the lucky ones because the Germans did not occupy Hungary till 1944, which was just 1 year before the war ended. However, the Hungarians were very loyal friends of the Germans. And when the Nuremberg laws came into action in the 30s, soon after Hitler came to power, Hungary adopted only one of those anti-Jewish laws. That meant that heads of families and young men, like my two brothers and many of Naomi's great uncles, had already been inducted into the forced labor camp in 1939, 40, 41. They've been sent to the Ukraine, and I wonder if any of you know about the very special fate that awaited the majority of young Jewish men in these so-called slave labor battalions. Have you ever heard of that? This is amazing. This story is yet to be told, so to speak, because it was so late and so few survived those labor camps, that we do have narratives, people telling stories that are in the archives, but few people go into the archives. We were very fortunate because my husband's father, and I'm sorry Paul couldn't come, he was in one of these labor camps from which he had escaped 3 times, so that's why he's alive. My two brothers, not. They were 20 and 22. These young Jewish men were inducted between the ages of about 18 to early 40. So by the time the Germans occupied Hungary in 44, but they found remaining women and children. And they were all taken to Auschwitz, right from the countryside. The Jews in Budapest suffered a different fate. But I'm afraid I lost my train of thought earlier. Did I try to say something and I didn't finish? You will be my mind keeper. You will
I'll try. Right.
Anyway, I may have been veering away from something that I intended to tell you. But let me finish this thought, because this is important. Those of us, like myself, I was 17 years old in 1944, who did get into the labor part of the Auschwitz Brigade, I am going to call it that way, those of us who were taken to Auschwitz. This group of people survived, but the majority of the Hungarian Jews perished. 450,000 Hungarian Jews were murdered, gassed, and then in the crematoria, like my father, in about 5 to 6 weeks period. I don't know if you can kind of fathom the magnitude of that killing that had to occur. Day and night, the crematoria were at work to process this number of people, because Eichmann was determined, even though even Himmler had said, you know, we are losing this war. After all, you know, I arrived, for example, myself in Auschwitz in June, the first week of June, 1944. Now, you all know what happened the first week of June of 1944, as far as the war is concerned. Yes? Who will tell me what was so important? Yes.
D-Day.
That's D-Day. We arrived in Auschwitz when the Americans and the Allied forces are landing in Normandy. This is after Stalingrad, the bad winter in Russia. So the Germans are losing the war, but they got heard that the Hungarians wanted to get out of the war. Hungarians are not very good politicians. They are always on the wrong side of the... They were with the Germans the First World War. They should have known better. So at that point in 1944, again I'm losing my train of thought. I want to tell you too many things because I want to talk to you.
The war seemed like it was ending at that point.
And at that point, and Eichmann, I want to say, and Eichmann was told by Himmler, this is the sentence I began, maybe the issue around the Hungarian Jews should be slowed down. But Eichmann, as we now know from his diary, said, no way. The war against the Jews, obviously, was ahead of the war against the Allies. Because in my little town, it didn't have a gas station because nobody had a car. So there were no trucks or cars. And suddenly, there they were to pick us up, to take us to the train station, to ferry us to Auschwitz. You get the sense that the annihilation of the European Jews had tremendous priority. And just Sunday, I went down to City Hall, where I had the privilege, and I wish more of you would have come, if any of you were there, to hear David Eisenhower. Did you hear him talk? He is really the right person to speak about what happened after the war, when his grandfather, the President Eisenhower, went into these camps and he found them. So 450,000 Hungarian Jews were killed. Altogether, this was, as I said earlier, more than half of the Jewish population, because Hungary had about 800,000 altogether. So the rest of the Jews in Budapest, logistics no longer allowed them. So they were collected into yellow star houses, and from time to time taken to the Danube. Houses were emptied. This was very systematically done by the Arrow Cross, which was the Hungarian Nazi Party, and they were shot into the Danube. If you ever want to see a most remarkable and most beautiful memorial, you can actually visualize it when you get on your Earth, Google Earth or whatever, these are shoes that line up longer than you, that the people were, you must have been there.
Yes.
I can see you agreeing with whatever I am saying.
Yes.
Did you see those shoes?
Yes. I was also in Auschwitz in the private display of Hungary and how what Hungary did, the government did to the Jews.
Do you want to tell your people what these shoes meant to you? I would really appreciate it. You remember the shoes?
Yes.
Tell them.
Well, it's very eerie because they're just kind of laying there, and there's a lot of interpretations for it. But for me, it's basically like lost generations and lost footsteps, and just entire lives that it represents that they didn't step any further. So their last step was basically into the water.
Can you just think, Paul, my husband, who escaped, as I mentioned earlier, found a family wandering on the street because the husband came to alert the family to what was happening, so they escaped, but they had no place to go.
Mm-hmm.
And Paul, after he had escaped from the Hungarian, from the Ukraine, they were already behind the Carpathian Mountains, found Budapest still under German occupation. So he went into the cellar of the Swiss consulate annex. There were 2,000 Jews in it, not one cellar, but whatever they can open up, you could open up. So you can imagine the conditions there. And this is under siege because this was in November of 1944, and the city was not liberated until the end of January or early February. So the Hungarian Jewish story, for whatever reason, just kind of slipped away. We had certainly plenty to mourn, because so early on in 1939, just as soon as the war began, the Polish Jews were already being gathered, and what happened in Ukraine, and you know all of that. I'm sure you do. You know what I'm going to do? Stop talking, because when I talk, I talk. All right?
That's possible.
She heard me many times. Actually, I also brought my book with me that will help me not to talk so much. Because now, Naomi, you are too young to remember, but this is, oh, maybe, do you remember any of those joint Seders?
Oh, yeah.
You do?
Of course, yeah.
You do remember that. I'm so pleased about that. Now, Naomi was a little girl when it all started. I told you it was 60 years that we have done every single year. We are doing our Seders together. And our oldest, her name is Sharon, was a Benda student, as you are now. And she came home and said, Mom, we love our Seders, but how much more beautiful it would be if everybody would say what freedom means to them personally. So the kids went, yes, you must remember, because I remember Raphael telling stories and Sharon, so you are not that much younger. And so the children heard the stories I began to write at that time for Pesach. So it was never meant to be published. It was for the children. And the first story I wrote actually was the Day of Liberation, May 8th, 1945. It was the end of the war, and that's when we were liberated. And from then on, every spring, I would write a story. And some kids would chime in. Now, Naomi's father is writing a book. And these stories will have again a place, and the way that he will describe how they learn about the Shoah through these stories. Now, this is a book, very cheap, but students can't afford. So you will have it in your library, so I can read it, so they can read it. But it describes essentially what the experience was like, the arrival, the cutting off one's hair, the getting of the tattoo, working in the various labor camps. One of them was a stone quarry, and the last one that we were at was in the Czechoslovakia, now it's the Czech Republic, in a large factory. And then that was liberation because, you know, even the longest of wars sometimes have an end. And that's how this one ended. And you already heard from the rabbi what happened after that. That we went to medical school and now really had a very good life here in the United States. Our children also went to medical school, yeah. Also became psychiatrists. And we have 3 children. The Ornsteins had 3 children. The 3 children had gotten married. They each have either 3 children or 2 children. You know what it is in the Talmud itself, if you save one life.
Yeah.
You have a whole generation. So please, it will be very good if you ask me questions. We Jews are pretty good in telling stories and keeping history. This is going to be in our favor. We talk, we write, we read. We like to be informed. And it is really up to you to tell the story. Because look, you are going, you celebrate Passover, you go to Seder's. You know how many thousands and thousands of years ago it was? No, you don't feel as if you yourself had come out of Egypt. I am sure you don't. But we have symbols, and we are trying to tell them that this is our history. And I agree with you. The Shoah is part of history. It cannot be forever alive in the way that it is alive for those who've been through it. However, this is one. The other is that the Holocaust is probably the most researched and documented horror that had occurred among the many, many, many horrors of the 20th century. I have many friends from Armenia, and they're saying, you know, how amazing. You have all these libraries full of books, and people read. We have a museum where you can go and so it's up to you people. Then, dor vador. We just have to do it the way Jews had always done it, by teaching. And we are pretty good at that. What happened right afterwards? I mean, we have to separate the generations here. The perpetrators did not experience guilt. Can you think that you have these people dig their own graves like they did, not just in Babi Yar, but in thousands of Babi Yar. We only know one Babi Yar, but there were many, many, many Babi Yar. Can you just think that there would be a young person who does that, takes us his machine gun, and goes like that? Then he has to step in, make sure that they are alive, step on them. Because he doesn't have a grave deep enough. There are so many of them that have to be killed and put into that grave. This man could do that. And you say, how on earth can anyone do that? The story is, no, I get that from German books. I didn't, hear that from anybody. This man had to be taken off that job after an hour. They were given a lot of alcohol, and many couldn't actually do it. And so these are the executioners. You also worry about the planners of the perpetrators. And these are the ones that you could see if you watched the movie called Nuremberg, the trial. And one after another, they didn't have any guilt. And I just finished the paper, maybe I can send you the paper, about what the absence of guilt means to a Western man, a civilized man. We couldn't stand it. Because guilt, and being a psychoanalyst, I can tell you, you either experience guilt consciously or unconsciously. But gets into your mind. Amazing number of documents available that these people neither repressed the guilt nor disavowed it because of the ideology that superseded, is that a good English word for that? That individually developed morality. In other words, the sense of morality on which Western civilization depends in many ways, you know. We were again the first ones, cut into stone, 10 Commandments, thou shalt not kill. This is that is the foundation of our civilization. And that is superseded by ideals. People give away their personal lives for a higher idea of what is good for mankind. So the Germans were successful. And that has a historical background, which I really don't have time to do, but you would know. So this is the first generation. You could not get anybody to speak. Okay. We lived in Germany, as you already know, for 5 years. We lived in the home of an SS. We lived in the home of a Nazi. We lived in the home of social democrats. We lived in a home of people who fought against the Nazis. So there were many kinds. The second generation also had trouble with that in terms of the family history. Government-wise, as you know, the story between Ben-Gurion and Adenauer, they did the right thing. Because Israel needed the money, needed those Mercedes Benzes that they were sending. That was a good thing. Now, that came the third generation of Germans, and I have many, many friends among them. And these people now, and only unfortunately a handful, insist that unless Germans go into their own families and have the families deal with the Nazi part, there will be no moral restitution. This is also my conviction. In many ways, Germany behaved itself when it came to the financial restitution part. Morally, no. Then, because what do we have in our Western societies to ensure? We have a justice system that's supposed to be separate from our political situation. No more. I agree with you. Or certainly not to the degree that you and I wish it would be separate. But what happens when the justice system is totally abolished? When the government tells you, well, that not only that it would be bad if you killed a Jew, but that's the highest honor you can get if you kill the Jew, because the Jew is the cancer on the body of mankind. It was the medical profession that signed up to this idea to begin with. And I just finished reading a paper. 7 times more doctors signed up to the Nazi Party than any other profession, because the ideology suited their personalities and their notion about illness and health. And when they were presented with the idea that you have to rescue, that you have to rescue the German nation from this illness that is caused by the presence of the Jews who are infiltrating your culture and taking over your government, and no, maybe they were right. Maybe they were right. Jews were smart and they got the head of the table. Maybe they shouldn't. I don't know. Do you know how many Jews lived in Hitler's time, percentage-wise, when Hitler came to power? What were the number of Jews who lived in Germany? Percentage-wise. Take a guess.
I imagine
What?
2%.
2?
10?
10? Any other number? Anybody wants to vote?
One.
One, you are the closest, less than one. The percentage of Jews in Germany were less than 1%, but they were doing lots of stuff. They were poets, they were writers, they did, when it came to working in a chemistry studio, you found many Jews. When you went to after the emancipation, Jews went to the universities. They became heads of departments. So yes, maybe there was something about these Jews all over the place. I'm not trying to figure out how the Germans thought about it. But it was not difficult to sell the idea that the culture and the people are at stake unless we do something about it. And that ideology really superseded individual sense of morality, and unfortunately, religion did not help. But both the Catholic and the Protestant churches felt that the state sanctioned actions come before personal conscience. This is a horrendous thing. And this is where we can be in trouble too. We are human beings like the Germans. We too are influenced by ideology and isms. We have our own Zionism and liberalism and whatever ism. That can override your personal. Like when the communists came into Hungary, I remember these people, they brought the KDG to their own parents' home because there was a painting on the wall that indicated that they are bourgeois. These were the sons of people. So, yeah, never mind, you get the point. So the situation in Germany, probably not as bad as in Hungary, which is worse today. Very bad, because it's open. You can beat up a Jew in a street and not too many people will worry about that. I don't think you can do that in Germany. That's true. Hungary is about the worst of all European states. They have a terrible government, terrible person in Orban. And it's just the way it is in Hungary. It's not a good situation in Israel. This is a painful, I tell you, Zionism was an idea that saved us emotionally. The idea that Jews can have a country where they will not be killed, persecuted, discriminated against. To live for that was everything for us. At this point, I wouldn't want to live in a country in the way that Israel is being governed. It would be horrendous. I would have to live there, and I don't want to abandon Israel, but I fear for her. Genocide is a situation when a person is killed for its religious or ethnic affiliation. We had major genocides, which should be, if you know who, that amazing person named Lemkin. Any of you know the name Lemkin? Lemkin was a Polish Jew who wrote, and I now picked up his book finally. Many people must have handled it because it's very torn. This man, after the lodge ghetto and all the things were happening, said, how come? It is a crime to kill one person, but it's not a crime to kill millions. There was no law that said you have to do something about that legally. And you should know that the United States of America did not subscribe to this idea altogether. They have all kinds of excuses for it. If you want to read just one book about genocides, and I have to tell you, it does not detail the horrors, but it gives you an overview with a special emphasis on the United States of America, on its silence. Because then you know that you are an informed citizen, and you know what happened in the 20th century, and when you say, can it recur? All over the place. The Holocaust was more of a license to commit genocide than the fear of it. What is ISIS doing? This is killing in the name of Allah, but long before that, many people killed in the name of God. If you are a religious genocide, they are the most dangerous, because you cannot reason about that. Once you bring in that Allah said and God said, you have to be quiet, highest authority. My opinion is not as good as yours or anybody else's who reads the newspapers. It is just an opinion. I mean, people talk about the influx in terms of France, that it has a very large Arab population. People bring up all the economic conditions. But I'm asking you young people, this is the longest living prejudice in the world. There is nothing that seems to make a dent on it. It is a real puzzle in many, many ways. And the question always is, what are we actually doing to make that this continues? Because you don't have to have contact with Jews to hate them. The propaganda, the idea, we are not just a people, we are also an idea. And that is, I don't know. I don't have an answer for you. Probably very complicated. I can only tell you that in my house that has many books, there are 2 shelves full with nothing other than books on anti-Semitism. People have been trying so hard to understand them. Yeah. No, I don't know. This is very psychological, your question. I'm a psychoanalyst, so, I had to, this is a very big question, because one of the things that too many ideas. Let me say that my profession treated the survivors in a horrible way. Rather than listening to us and really learning from our experiences, they made up their minds before they ever met us what's wrong with us on the basis of their theories. That's a danger about theory. You constantly have to check it out. What does it have to do with reality? I'm sure you are a scientist, so you don't fall into that trap, I hope. But psychoanalysts did it in a wholesale way. So they decided that we are all sick, and one reason that survivors are all untreatably damaged is because they were unable to mourn their terrible losses. That never made sense to me, first of all, because I have many survivor friends, and they in turn have lots of children, got married, more children. I know so many, and when you ask them to read these papers, the survivors will tell you, that's not about me. So I wrote a paper, and that's the one that you are referring to, specifically about mourning. Are we capable of mourning? I would say we mourn our whole lives. But mourning and successful, when you really engage in the process, is the only way you can engage life. Now, let me give you an example. Sounds a little abstract. But you don't think that when you move from the 2nd grade to the 3rd, you didn't call it mourning, but you kept saying that you are going to miss Mrs. Carter. And where is your friend going that used to sit next to you? and you build memories. And you have, in other words, you are in a state of mourning almost every day. Because you are constantly giving up something you are attached to. If you are free to get attached, you are lucky to be able to mourn. You got that point, did you? You got that point. So for us, certainly, I tell you, when I have a dream about my brothers, that's a wonderful experience. I'm with them. So I wrote this paper that you're referring to, that we have what I called a memorial space. And by this I mean a mental territory. You read a poem, or you listen to some mournful, beautiful music, and your eyes fill with tears, and you are with people that you remember, or with things that maybe your dog, cat, I don't know, something very dear to you. But we are constantly, we always have the opportunity to mourn, and they have to occur in certain places at certain times. For many years, the most effective way for me was to go to the Yom Kippur afternoon services. And the early phase in the Reform, we had long passages about people, never mind, who buried in their unnamed graves, and all kinds of ways of describing. Art is a marvelous way for people to communicate sadness, grief, not sadness, it's grief. And so the people who watch these or read these poems or watch these pictures and read these poems are drawn into that state of mourning. Did I make that clear to you?
Yes.
Okay. So we don't have Shiva. We did not have memorial events. We don't know the date or the way. I know that my brother, the younger one, who was 20, died in Mauthausen. And for me, the visit to Mauthausen was the most important of all the visits. I've been to many camps, almost to all of them in Germany, because we lived there, so it was easy for me to go there. But my older brother, I have no idea. So while individual mourning can take place more, you go to the funeral, you go to you sit Shiva, there are all kinds of, and we Jews are again pretty good at that, of creating situations in which mourning can take place. And then a whole year a man cannot shave. There are many, many ways in which you express your grief. We, who lost everybody and everything, have a different way, which doesn't mean that we don't mourn. It's not the same way. And this is the problem with the literature. The literature doesn't know that. They say you didn't mourn because you had to go on living. We had to go on living, not at the beginning. It takes time. Can I tell one story? This is about your dad. Your father just came back from Warsaw and found out that Naomi's grandmother was a fighter. She was born in Lemberg, was my best friend. Lucia was born in Lemberg. She had Aryan papers at age 15, went to Warsaw. That is all written up by her, by Frank, Naomi's dad. And just one thing, because it is a story about her. Her granddaughter, your father just, let me get back. So Frank just came back from Warsaw telling us that there will be a museum for the fighters. And Lucia was not in the ghetto, she was on Aryan paper, she fought on the Aryan side, but at the end, they all got mixed up in the sewers. So I'm listening to this story, and I heard it before, and I knew some of it. And from this place, I'm walking into the room where Shira, your cousin, is just being lifted up. She's being celebrated. This is her bat mitzvah. And the image of Lucia in the sewer with a gun and Shira celebrating bat mitzvah became one in my mind. And that is a way in which you can think of how our memories and mourning actually become stronger, more alive at moments when we also experience joy. Because it is then that you can afford to feel the pain of that loss. You follow that? How come my colleagues don't understand? They said, how? It's something strange. Because you have to be strong, be able to love, we go pretty crazy. I'm so sorry, all the bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs are over. Now we're waiting for weddings. So something has to happen because we really love those events and we all go a little crazy with them.
They're very fun.
Absolutely crazy. And this is the time I cry the most.